It was a mystery to me, but not to the other doctors. They took, as was natural, the worst possible view of the matter and accepted the only solution which the facts seemed to warrant. But they are men, and I am a woman. Besides, I knew the nurse well, and I could not believe her capable of willful deceit, much less of the heinous crime which deceit in this case involved. So to me the affair was a mystery. My patient, a young typewriter, seemingly without friends or enemies, lay in a small room of a boarding house, afflicted with a painful but not dangerous malady. Though she was comparatively helpless, her vital organs were strong, and we never had a moment's uneasiness concerning her, till one morning when we found her in an almost dying condition from having taken, as we quickly discovered, a dose of poison instead of the soothing mixture which had been left for her with the nurse. Poison? And no one, not even herself or the nurse, could explain how the same got into the room, much less into her medicine. And when I came to study the situation, I found myself as much at loss as they, indeed more so, for I knew I had made no mistake in preparing the mixture, and that, even if I had, this especial poison could not have found its way into it, owing to the fact that there neither was, nor ever had been, a drop of it in my possession. The mixture, then, was pure when it left my hand, and, according to the nurse, whom, as I have said, I implicitly believe, it went into the glass pure. And yet, when, 2 hours later, without her having left the room or anybody coming into it, she found occasion to administer the draught, poison was in the cup, and the patient was only saved from death by the most immediate and energetic measures, not only on her part, but on that of Dr. Holmes, whom in her haste and perturbation she had called in from the adjacent house. The patient, young, innocent, unfortunate, but of a strangely courageous disposition, betrayed nothing but the utmost surprise at the peril she had so narrowly escaped. When Dr. Holmes intimated that perhaps she had been tired of suffering and had herself found means of putting the deadly drug into her medicine, she opened her great gray eyes with such a look of childlike surprise and reproach that he blushed and murmured some sort of apology. "Poison myself," she cried, "when you promise me that I shall get well. You do not know what a horror I have of dying in debt, or you would never say that." This was some time after the critical moment had passed, and there were in the room Mrs. Dayton, the landlady, Dr. Holmes, the nurse, and myself. At the utterance of these words, we all felt ashamed and cast looks of increased interest at the poor girl. She was very lovely, though without means, and to all appearance without friends. She possessed in great degree the charm of winsomeness, and not even her many sufferings, nor the indignation under which she was then laboring, could quite rob her countenance of that tender and confiding expression which so often redeems the plainest face and makes beauty doubly attractive. "Dr. Holmes does not know you," I hasten to say. "I do and utterly repel for you any such insinuation. In return, will you tell me if there is anyone in the world whom you can call your enemy? Though the chief mystery is how so deadly and unusual a poison could have gotten into a clean glass without the knowledge of yourself or the nurse, still it might not be amiss to know if there is any one, here or elsewhere, who for any reason might desire your death, The surprise in the childlike eyes increased rather than diminished. "I don't know what to say," she murmured. "I am so insignificant and feeble a person that it seems absurd for me to talk of having an enemy. Besides, I have none. On the contrary, everyone seems to love me more than I deserve." "Haven't you noticed it, Mrs. Dayton?" The landlady smiled and stroked the sick girl's hand. "Indeed," she replied. "I have noticed that people love you, but I have never thought that it was more than you deserved. You are a dear little thing, Addie." And though she knew and I knew that the everyone mentioned by the poor girl meant ourselves and possibly her unknown employer, we were nonetheless touched by her words. The more we studied the mystery, the deeper and less explainable did it become. And indeed, I doubt if we should have ever got to the bottom of it if there had not presently occurred in my patient a repetition of the same dangerous symptoms, followed by the same discovery of poison in the glass, and the same failure on the part of herself and nurse to account for it. I was aroused from my bed at midnight to attend her, and as I entered her room and met her beseeching eyes looking upon me from the very shadow of death, I made a vow that I would never cease my efforts till I had penetrated the secret of what certainly looked like a persistent attempt upon this poor girl's life. I went about the matter deliberately. As soon as I could leave her side, I drew the nurse into a corner and again questioned her. The answers were the same as before. Addie had shown distress as soon as she had swallowed her usual quantity of medicine, and in a few minutes more was in a perilous condition. "Did you hand the glass yourself to Addie?" "I did." "Where did you take it from?" "From the place where you left it, the little stand on the farther side of the bed." "And do you mean to say that you had not touched it since I prepared it?" "I do, ma'am." "And that no one else has been in the room?" "No one, ma'am." I looked at her intently. I trusted her, but the best of us are but mortal. "Can you assure me that you have not been asleep during this time?" "Look at this letter I've been writing," she returned. "It is 8 pages long, and it was not begun when you left us at 10 o'clock. I shook my head and fell into a deep reverie. How was that matter to be elucidated, and how was my patient to be saved? Another draught of this deadly poison, and no power on earth could resuscitate her. What should I do, and with what weapons should I combat a danger at once so subtle and so deadly? Reflection brought no decision, and I left the room at last, determined upon but one point, and that was the immediate removal of my patient. But before I had left the house, I changed my mind even on this point. Removal of the patient meant safety to her, perhaps, but not the explanation of her mysterious poisoning. I would change the position of her bed, and I would even set a watch over her and the nurse, but I would not take her out of the house. Not yet. And what had produced this change in my plans? The look of a woman whom I met on the stairs. I did not know her, but when I encountered her glance, I felt that there was some connection between us, and I was not at all surprised to hear her ask, "And how is Miss Wilcox today?" "Miss Wilcox is very low," I returned. The least neglect, the least shock to her nerves would be sufficient to make all my efforts useless. Otherwise, she will get well. I nodded. I had exaggerated the condition of the sufferer, but some secret instinct compelled me to do so. The look which passed over the woman's face satisfied me that I had done well, and, though I left the house, it was with the intention of speedily returning and making inquiries into the woman's character and position in the household. I learned little or nothing. That she occupied a good room and paid for it regularly seemed to be sufficient to satisfy Mrs. Dayton. Her name, which proved to be LaRue, showed her to be French, and her promptly paid $10 a week showed her to be respectable. What more could any hard-working landlady require? But I was distrustful. Her face, though handsome, possessed an eager, ferocious look which I could not forget. And the slight gesture with which she had passed me at the close of the short conversation I have given above had a suggestion of triumph in it, which seemed to contain whole volumes of secret and mysterious hate. I went into Miss Wilcox's room very thoughtful. I am going. But here the nurse held up her hand. "Hark," she whispered. She had just set the clock and was listening to its striking. I did hark, but not to the clock. "Whose step is that?" I asked, after she had left the clock and sat down. "Oh, someone in the next room. The walls here are very thin. Only boards in places." I did not complete what I had begun to say. If I could hear steps through the partition, then could our neighbors hear us talk? And what I had determined upon must be kept secret from all outsiders. I drew a sheet of paper toward me and wrote, "I shall stay here tonight. Something tells me that in doing this, I shall solve this mystery. But I must appear to go. Take my instructions as usual and bid me good night. Lock the door after me, but with a turn of the key instantly unlock it again. I shall go downstairs, see that my carriage drives away, and quietly return. On my re-entrance, I shall expect to find Miss Wilcox on the couch with the screen drawn up around it, you in your big chair, and the light lowered. What I do thereafter need not concern you. Pretend to go to sleep." The nurse nodded and immediately entered upon the program I had planned. I prepared the medicine as usual, placed it in its usual glass, and laid that glass where it had always been set, on a small table at the farther side of the bed. Then I said, "Good night," and passed hurriedly out. 5 minutes later, I was back in the room. Everything had been arranged as I desired. Addie lay so quiet behind the screen that I could hear the nurse breathe, and the nurse herself, with bent head and folded hands, seemed already half asleep in the great chair. The lamp had been turned low, and the whole chamber wore that shadowy aspect favorable to my purpose. Without a sound, I slipped into the darkest corner the room afforded, one from which I could keep both the little table and the partition in view. Then I waited. An hour passed, then another. Nothing occurred. The nurse's head drooped lower. Once Addie stirred and gave a faint sigh. Outside in the hall, a board creaked and some late lodger went by. But within the room itself, all was still. Still with that oppressive, almost preternatural stillness which accompanies suspense. At last, just as I had begun to question whether my instinct had not deceived me, I heard a faint, scratching sound at the wall. It was so light that only a trained ear could have distinguished it from the ordinary noises of an old house. But to me, on the strain as I was, it came with startling significance. I bent forward and looked fixedly toward the farther side of the bed. The sound was repeated. Then, in the very board against which the little stand rested, I perceived a tiny dark speck where no dark speck had been before. A moment later it widened. Some bit of paste or paper had been removed from a gimlet hole skillfully concealed in the grain of the wood. Through this aperture, there presently stole the end of a very slender tube. I understood all. Before the drop, which glittered at its tip, had time to fall, I crossed the room at a bound, seized the glass from the stand, and with my other hand struck sharply upon the partition. The tube vanished. A low cry broke from the adjoining room. "Mrs. LaRue," I called, "open your door." No answer. The nurse had sprung to her feet, and Addie, terrified but unharmed, had pushed aside the screen and was gazing at me with startled eyes. "Stay where you are," I cried to them both, and snatching up the lamp, I flew into the passage and knocked again at Madame LaRue's door. Still no answer. Then Mrs. Dayton, roused by the noise, came hurrying from below, and between us, we forced an entrance. Madame LaRue stood in the middle of the room, white as death and shaking in every limb. In her hand, she held a small vial. Upon the table before her lay a length of the hollow reed, by whose means she had so ingeniously projected the poison into Addie's medicine. She made one fierce movement, as if to destroy the vial and perhaps herself with it, but I was too quick. I caught her wrist, and the bottle fell unemptied to the floor. For one instant, she regarded me with a look of concentrated hatred. Then, all her strength seemed to fail her. She dropped into a chair and covered her face. "It is over," she murmured. "You have been wiser than I." "Why have you done this thing?" I demanded. She took her hands from before her face and looked from me to Mrs. Dayton, then beyond us, as if she saw not that poor lodging house chamber, but some scene long buried in the past. "Because she is a Wilcox," she answered. "Because the man who ruined my life bore that name, and because when I learned who she was and saw in her face the image of another face I once trusted, my heart became a hell within me." Addie herself had followed us by this time, and now stood in the doorway supported by the nurse. At these words, Madame LaRue turned and saw her. The sight seemed to break the last barrier in her breast. "No," she cried wildly, "it was not your fault. You never harmed me. You are innocent. Too innocent. That was why I hated you. You had what I had lost: youth, hope, the love that comes unasked. And when I heard your name and learned whose child you were, the old misery rose up and mastered me. Twice I sought your life, and twice you escaped me. Tonight I should have succeeded had not this woman watched better than I knew." Poor Addie uttered one low moan and hid her face on the nurse's shoulder. I need not detail what followed. The police were sent for, and the mechanical part of the mystery was fully explained. The room occupied by Madame LaRue adjoined that of my patient. In the partition, behind the bed, was a minute opening, concealed on LaRue's side by a picture, and on the other by the ordinary roughness of the wall. Through this, she could, by aid of the delicate tube I found in her room, introduce drop after drop of the poison into the glass standing always in the same place. The nurse, sitting with her back turned, could not see the act. Addie, lying helpless and screened from the stand itself, suspected nothing, and thus a crime that seemed impossible had been more than once attempted within a few feet of two waking persons. The moral explanation was more pitiful than the physical. One was ingenious. Madame Leroux had indeed suffered a great wrong in early life at the hands of a man named Wilcox. And the discovery that the gentle girl in the next room was his daughter had awakened in her a vengeance as unreasonable as it was fierce. Yet at the last, when she saw the creature she had tried to destroy standing pale, weak and forgiving before her, remorse entered where hatred had so long reigned. Addie recovered. In time she learned the whole unhappy story, and I think her tender heart pitied even the woman who had sought her death. As for myself, I have never forgotten the lesson of that night. There are mysteries of guilt which look like miracles till one finds the hidden hole in the wall, and there are crimes which seem monstrous beyond explanation till one discovers, behind them, not a fiend, but a broken human heart